My brother ruined my life and even got my wife pregnant. Now he's begging for my help after our parents cut him off and left me their $2 million inheritance. What if the two people you trusted most in this world, your wife and your own brother, secretly plotted to shatter your entire existence? I never thought I'd live through a betrayal so deep, so utterly soul-crushing, that it would force me to confront years of simmering resentment head-on. You know, my younger brother, David, always had this deep, unsettling resentment towards me. And if you think it was jealousy, you'd be dead wrong. He was the golden child, not me. Mom always indulged him. She cooked his meals, did his laundry, even asked me to help him with his schoolwork. I was just expected to assist him because we were family, but I never got that same consideration. I just accepted it. Maybe it was partly my fault, always meeting his needs without expecting anything back. He never helped me. He only ever came around when he wanted something. I was this quiet, introverted kid who loved studying, loved keeping to myself. David? He was loud and rough, just like our dad. I also tend to be straightforward, brutally honest, no sugarcoating. I think that might have made Mom see me in a negative light. This favoritism meant David was the family darling, and honestly, as a kid, I didn't really mind. But then things changed. He started bullying me, mocking me for being different. He'd tease me about my height, my glasses. He'd sneak into my room, read my diary, then run to Mom, complaining about what I'd written. When I yelled, when I complained about him invading my privacy, they'd just laugh it off, saying it wasn't a big deal. He did worse things. He nearly broke my glasses once. He'd put nasty stuff in my food, one time little stones in my cereal. Luckily, I found them before I chipped a tooth. When I told Mom, she just dismissed it, saying, and I quote, "This is how brothers bond." Can you believe that? Whenever we fought, David would zero in on my insecurities. We went to the same school, so he knew I was being bullied by some kids. Instead of supporting me, he'd side with them, calling me names like ugly loser or hairy monkey, encouraging them to physically harm me, saying I was just a big failure. Another time, during a fight over something totally trivial, I can't even remember what, he told me to kill myself. Most insults I could brush off, but that one, it hit me like a truck. I was struggling with my mental health at the time, and to hear my own brother say that it was devastating. I'm doing much better now, thankfully, but that memory still stings. Dad was usually at work, and Mom didn't seem to care much. She even scolded me once, claiming it was my fault for irritating David. Things just got worse in high school. There was this shocking incident when David actually tried to set my hair on fire, and unbelievably, Mom defended him, saying he was just playing. Playing? Who plays like that? But that was a turning point. Thankfully, Dad finally sided with me. He pointed out the gravity of the situation, even threatening to call the police on David. That was a real eye-opener for my brother. He'd never faced consequences before. He was genuinely stunned. Dad made it clear, enough was enough. David needed to start respecting his older brother. Later, Dad came into my room to talk. I never expected his support. He always told David how similar they were, which was true. But that night, Dad admitted he'd waited years, hoping David would mature, but he was slowly realizing David was just becoming a big bully. Hearing that from my dad, it was incredibly validating. I almost broke down in tears. I confessed everything David had done over the years, even the bullying at school. Dad was shocked at how much I'd endured. The next day, he spoke to the principal, making sure the bullies knew there'd be severe consequences. And that evening, Dad enrolled me in MMA at our local gym. He told me I needed to man up and stand up to the bullies in my life. I know a nerdy kid like me trying to learn to fight probably sounded laughable, but I was so focused. I balanced my studies and daily workouts, and those MMA classes completely changed my life, both physically and mentally. One day, David was at it again. He stole my pocket money, money I'd earned helping with chores, money I'd been saving. He snuck into my room and took it. I caught him just as he was about to cycle off with his friends. I demanded he give it back. David just mocked me, saying all I could do was run to Daddy. I don't know what came over me, but I just punched him right in the face. He was stunned. He fell backward. I retrieved my money from his pocket, then shoved him back down. David started crying loudly, which, I'll admit, was pretty comical. Of course, Mom rushed out to help him, and when she learned I'd fought him, she was furious. She reprimanded me, saying I should be a better role model. David just sat there, soaking it all in, enjoying watching me get scolded. Mom even complained to Dad, saying I needed to be controlled. Dad, grim-faced, asked us both to explain. I told him how David had stolen my hard-earned money. David tried to justify it, saying he needed it for a date and that, as his brother, I should help him. Dad told David he was lucky I only punched him for stealing because anyone else would have called the police. He continued, telling David he had no right to take other people's things. David didn't like that one bit. He threw a tantrum, probably hoping Mom would side with him, but Dad stayed firm. When David realized he wasn't going to be punished for getting hit, he screamed how much he hated me, then ran back to his room, locking himself in. After that incident, David started to distance himself. He finally understood he couldn't bully me anymore, that even Dad had stopped supporting his antics. For the first time in a long while, I felt like we were equals. Though he could no longer physically harm me, he resorted to verbal insults when our parents weren't around. His behavior worsened with age, becoming angrier and more short-tempered each year. If I approached him with a question, he'd ignore me, muttering insults like nerd or loser under his breath. If he needed to communicate something, he'd relay it through Mom instead of speaking to me directly. When I questioned her about it, she'd just urge me to be more understanding. I couldn't tell if it was just puberty or genuine hatred. Over time, dealing with his comments became unbearable. I longed to move out, to just get away from him. I repeatedly asked Mom to mediate a sit-down conversation to resolve our issues, but she always refused, saying she didn't want to get involved. When I asked her opinion on why David treated me this way, she'd just brush off the question. Eventually, I left for my dream university, having earned a scholarship as a top student. Dad threw a party for me, and even Mom seemed proud. But David remained aloof, distant, barely acknowledging my achievements. The day I left was a mix of excitement for the future and sheer relief to escape that toxic home. The first few months at university were liberating. I made new friends, enjoyed my classes, and started building a life separate from the oppressive atmosphere of my childhood. The constant fear of David's verbal attacks lifted, giving me a newfound sense of peace. During my second year, I met my wife, Karen, at a frat party through a friend. We immediately clicked. Coming from a religious background, having kids outside of marriage was frowned upon. So when we discovered she was pregnant in our final year, we decided to marry right after graduation. Our wedding was small but joyful. Our parents were happy, and we really enjoyed the celebration. In that moment, I truly believed Karen was the love of my life. I'd always envisioned a monogamous relationship, one woman to come home to share my life with. Despite other women showing interest, I never pursued anything because I was genuinely content. Karen was my dream girl, and I never wanted to hurt her. However, I later uncovered 2 incidents of infidelity in our marriage. One was an intermittent affair with her married coworker that spanned several years, and the other was a brief fling with an ex-boyfriend during a visit to her family. Some might think I was naive, and looking back, I can't completely disagree. Each time we separated for a while, and each time I chose to forgive my wife. I didn't want to raise our child in a broken home, and I truly believed we could overcome these obstacles. The affair with her coworker happened when we were young, and I attributed it to youthful mistakes and poor judgment. For a period, things seemed to get better. I could never fully trust her again, but I did my best to set aside my doubts, knowing that if I chose to forgive, I had to genuinely work toward a fresh start. It's been 4 years since her second betrayal, and I felt confident in my decision to give her another chance. Karen seemed to have changed, and we were genuinely happy, planning our family's future. But then, 3 months ago, my world shattered once more. She revealed she had been having a long-term affair, and then she suggested that our son might not even be mine. Her words struck me like a ton of bricks. Shock, betrayal, disbelief. It all overwhelmed me. I struggled to comprehend the enormity of her confession. In a daze, I managed to ask why she had kept such a significant secret and how she could have done something so devastating. Her reaction was cold, indifferent, as if she were detached from the pain she caused. Her vague responses left me with more questions than answers. It was surreal, a truly painful moment, confronting the shattered trust and the uncertainty about my own family. I pressed her, Karen, for the truth. I felt I deserved to know the father of the child I had been raising since birth. Ultimately, she admitted it. It was David. My eyes widened in shock. What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She explained that she and David had become friends when I introduced her to my family. She had stayed with us from Thanksgiving until New Year's. David, usually cold to me, was warm and polite towards her, which at the time made me glad. I didn't want Karen to feel unwelcome. Karen wanted to be accepted into my family, so she spent significant time with my mom whenever possible. She noticed the rift between David and me and questioned me about it. I opened up about our strained relationship, explaining we might never repair it due to his unresolved feelings. Karen understood, but started including David in our outings, hoping it would help us bond. Whenever we planned to watch a movie, she invited David, and we'd watch whatever he chose. During this time, David and I actually exchanged a few words, which was an improvement compared to his usual silent treatment. I remember Karen and David hanging out, playing video games together, but I never thought anything of it. Karen told me that one day, David opened up to her about his struggles, a recent breakup, feeling vulnerable. He struck up a friendship with her. She mentioned he would harmlessly flirt with her when I wasn't around, and eventually, she said, things escalated beyond her control. The vision of my wife and brother sleeping together, it made me feel physically sick. Karen confessed she felt guilty afterward and left him, which matched her abrupt decision to go home instead of spending New Year's with me. Though I tried to convince her to stay, she was adamant. When we met back at college after the holidays, she was her usual cheerful self, so I didn't question anything. 2 weeks later, we found out she was pregnant. Karen admitted she didn't know if the child was mine or David's, and with no way to prove it, she chose to stay with me, knowing I was the more dependable brother. This, she said, was why we got married. My world felt like it was crashing down. The son I loved might not even be mine. I asked Karen if she had been sleeping with Avid recently. She slowly nodded. She revealed they had always stayed in touch because their chemistry was undeniable. They would sneak off to hotels, lying to me about working overtime. She even admitted that half of her business trips were actually romantic getaways with him. I asked her why she married me if she wanted my brother. Karen said she didn't want to be the one to break off the marriage. She saw me as a wonderful father to our son and decided to stay. In her words, she made a mistake and didn't know when to stop. I told Karen I was glad she finally told me the truth, but that I was going to pack up and leave. She started crying, asking for forgiveness, expecting me to yell. Instead, I calmly packed my clothes. Karen insisted that if I loved her, I should fight for her, that mistakes happen in every marriage. When she realized I wasn't going to do anything, she changed tactics, saying our son would be affected by a divorce, that children shouldn't be raised in broken homes. I reminded her that I might not even be the father, which made her cry more, accusing me of being cruel. It seemed like she believed nothing could make me want to leave. Perhaps it was partly my fault for letting things slide in the past. While I did love her, it felt more like it stemmed from thinking we had a son together and had been together since college. Karen kept insisting it wasn't too late to fix things, but I struggled to believe her. I had no patience left. Trust was a major issue, and her words felt hollow. Even if I forgave her, I could never forget she slept with my brother. I've always believed in forgiving mistakes because we're all flawed, but this was beyond acceptable limits. I left her crying on the doorstep and checked into a hotel. The next day, I went straight to my parents and revealed everything about my wife's affair with David, explaining how they had been secretly sleeping together for years. The shock on their faces was undeniable. True to her nature, my mother initially tried to defend David, insisting that her boy could never do such a thing to his own brother. Determined to expose the truth, I asked my parents to remain silent and let me call David in front of them. I instructed them to stay quiet so I could catch David off guard, making him believe it was a private conversation. When David answered the phone, I confronted him about the affair. At first, he vehemently denied it, refusing to accept any responsibility. However, when I told him that Karen had admitted to everything, he started blaming her, calling her characterless. He claimed it wasn't his fault if women were attracted to him, and that he was the better-looking brother. I told him firmly that I would expose him to everyone. When David mocked me, saying no one would believe him because he was the golden child, I scoffed at his arrogance and thanked him for confirming the truth. I knew our parents had heard everything. David went quiet. Then he spluttered, trying to explain himself, trying to salvage his image. My mother, still in shock, demanded an explanation from him. He stuttered through a feeble attempt to justify his actions, blaming everyone else but himself, desperately trying to shift the blame onto Karen. I could see my mother, who had once been so protective of her favored son, now felt a mix of disappointment and anger. In that charged moment, I felt a strange sense of vindication. For years, I had endured David's torment. Now the truth was out, and the roles were reversed. It was David who stood exposed, his actions laid bare for everyone to see. As David's words faltered, my father, usually reserved in his expressions, couldn't contain his disappointment. He asked me to pass him the phone and began to speak to David. "David," my father began, his voice laden with disappointment, "what you've done isn't just a betrayal of your brother, but a betrayal of this family. You slept with your brother's wife and continued the affair even after they were married. Your actions have severe consequences and have irreversibly shattered the trust we had in you. I raised both of you to value family, loyalty, and decency. What you've shown today defies everything I've tried to teach you." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink into David's conscience. "Your disregard for your brother's feelings and the lack of respect for his marriage are unacceptable. You've not only hurt him, but also torn apart the bonds that hold our family together. Your mother and I are partly to blame for what you've become, but we will no longer tolerate this behavior. From today, you're cut off from the college funds I set up for you. You'll have to figure out how to pay your university fees on your own. I will also stop funding your lifestyle. Do you think it makes you more of a man to sleep with married women? Let's see how you manage without my money." Throughout this, I maintained a composed demeanor. While I initially wanted to scream at David, watching my dad punish him was the ultimate vindication. I had exposed his true nature, and it was clear he had underestimated the consequences. My mother, despite David's persistent protests, continued to justify him, but my father swiftly ended the call, shutting down David's attempts to explain away his actions. Afterward, my mom approached me and hugged me. It had been a long time since we shared such a moment, but in that embrace there was an unspoken understanding and support. Amid the family turmoil, she apologized for not believing me all this time. My 14-year-old self could never have imagined this moment, being vindicated and embraced by my mother. Following this, my dad helped me find a good lawyer to divorce Karen. She and her lawyer tried to fight dirty, asking for alimony since I earned more than her, but her affair played heavily in my favor. We also conducted a paternity test, and it was confirmed. David was indeed the father of the child. The news was incredibly painful, even worse than discovering Karen's infidelity. I was furious that the son I had loved and raised wasn't mine. However, I decided to stay strong. Karen begged me to continue visiting my son, arguing he shouldn't be punished for the situation. But I couldn't bear to see him. He reminded me too much of David, and I hated it. And to address the elephant in the room for those who might judge, I'm not comfortable raising another man's child. This isn't a stepson situation. I was led to believe Henry was my son, only to later discover he is actually my brother David's son. Naturally, this revelation hurt deeply, and I cried over it for days. The main reason I don't want any contact with Henry is that I no longer want Karen in my life. If I remain connected to her child, she will find a way to re-enter my life, and I need my space to heal. You may think I'm cruel or selfish, but I can't see him ever again, at least not for a very long time. After my divorce was finalized, a sense of freedom washed over me as I moved into my own bachelor pad. It felt surreal to live alone since I had married so young and never really had the chance to experience independence. However, my naturally independent nature allowed me to quickly adapt to my new lifestyle, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. 2 weeks ago, my dad called to tell me he was considering changing his will. He didn't want to leave anything to David. My dad is incredibly stubborn, and once he decides to cut David out of his life, he sticks to it. David tried reaching out to our parents, even showed up at their doorstep begging for forgiveness, but they refused to let him in. Even my mother, who usually gave in to David's tantrums, seemed done with him, though it must have been hardest for her. David never texted me to apologize for what he had done, showing he didn't regret his actions. He was just upset about being cut off from our parents. Dad told me he planned to leave everything to me, ensuring David wouldn't contest it later. He would leave David only $1. My eyes widened in shock. My dad had worked hard his entire life. His assets, retirement fund, and life insurance totaled nearly $2 million. The only condition in his will was that if my dad passed away before my mom, she would continue living in their house, even though ownership would transfer to me. I didn't mind this, as I wanted to care for my mom in her final days. Somehow, David found out about this. Unable to reach our parents, he called me yesterday, trying to make amends. He explained how he was struggling with college, and that after Karen discovered the paternity of the child, she had been pestering him for child support. He said he had no money and was looking for part-time jobs, but couldn't find anything. He begged me to talk to our family, to start fresh, since he really needed my help. I laughed in his face. I told him I was done with him. I reminded him that he should have thought about the consequences before sleeping with my wife and getting her pregnant. David argued that I was being unfair and that Karen was also to blame, to which I agreed. I reminded him that I had divorced her, making her his responsibility now. He shouldn't be calling me to complain about her or the child, since these were the consequences of his own actions. David started to raise his voice, but I interrupted, reminding him that he was no longer the favored child in the family, but the black sheep who had slept with his own brother's wife. At that moment, David began to cry. He told me how everyone, including our grandparents and relatives, had turned against him. While this was true, it was no longer my concern. I told him we were done, and that he should never call me again, since I no longer considered him my brother. Since then, I've replayed the conversation in my mind. Despite my hatred for my brother, I had never heard him cry, at least not since we were kids. I won't lie, it did hurt me a bit to see him so helpless. It made me wonder for a fleeting moment if I should talk to our parents about him. But then I remembered everything. And speaking of our parents, most of you correctly guessed that it was my mother who informed David about my dad changing his will. I confronted her in front of my dad, and she broke down, saying I had punished David enough and that he had learned his lesson. My dad firmly told my mother that if she believed what David did was forgivable, then he could no longer stay married to her, because he could never forgive such a betrayal. That threat silenced my mother, My dad made it clear that if she ever talked with David again, and we found out, she could pack her bags and leave. Like I said, my dad is very stubborn. Hopefully, my mother will learn from her mistakes. It's been 5 months since my last update. My relationship with my parents has improved significantly. My dad and I go golfing every weekend now. He treats me more like a buddy than a son. Although my mother misses David, she has stayed away from him. The last I heard about David was from my cousin, who said David had been asking everyone for money and eventually had to drop out of college because he couldn't afford the fees. He and Karen are living together now, and he has a part-time job as a mechanic. Apparently, they are raising Henry together, which is a good thing, I guess. I never discussed David with my parents, and they don't bring him up either. For everyone asking, I'm doing quite well. I was promoted at my job 2 months ago, so my salary has significantly improved. I haven't been dating anyone as I feel I still need time and space to heal. I've been going to therapy, so we'll see how that works out. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever faced such a complex betrayal from family? I really want to know what you think.